This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. I just have a few introductory slides, then I'll turn it over to Algie. If you.
Okay, we are on.
Here we go. Well, I'll tell you what, it's not letting me go to slideshow, so I'll just do it like this. So Algernon Austin, aka Algie, he's currently Director of Race and Economic Justice at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Algie, how many years did you spend at Boys RC School?
I don't recall. I think I was 7 when I left Trinidad. So
Okay.
Yeah, so probably just about 2 or 3 years. But in the interest of time, I was gonna tell a little joke about your time at boys' school, but I think it's time to get started with the presentation. So I'll move on.
No, we gotta hear the joke. Come on, what's that?
Yo, you want to hear the joke?
Yeah.
All right, I'll tell you the joke. All right, Algie doesn't know this is coming. But, so Algie, we were leaving for presentation, and do you guys remember there was a bus trip after when we were leaving boys' school? Those of you who went to boys' school, do you remember that? There was a bus trip to the zoo or something.
Yeah,
you remember that?
I remember that. Yeah.
Okay, so Algie's teacher came to me and said, "You're not going on that bus trip." I'm like, "What? Why? Why am I not going on the bus trip?" She said, "Because, your brother, he's not really," I'm gonna put this gently, so as not to embarrass him. He's not really completely toilet trained yet. and we're not gonna clean up after him. So you're not going on the trip. So Algie, this is what you do for the people that you love. You stay behind, you miss your graduation zoo trip to clean up after your younger brother. But yes.
Listen,
Yes.
I will have to sing a calypso about brothers' love or something.
Brothers love, yeah, brothers love.
I still waited for the joke. I see it embarrassed man. I hear the joke yet.
Well, it wasn't a joke then, but it's a joke now. So anyway, so Algie attended Wesleyan University, Northwestern University. He's always been a scholar student. Algie, you got accepted to Yale, right? Am I correct? Am I remembering correctly?
I think so.
You think so? You did, because we got into a big argument. So he's trying to be modest. He got accepted to Yale, and I told him he should go to Yale, and he told me, "No, I'm not going." So, but he decided to go to Wesleyan University. I came to find out later that Wesleyan University was one of the top liberal arts schools in the Northeast. So he actually was a really good fit for him. He taught me a lesson. It's not necessarily the name of the school. It's the fit. He did his PhD at Northwestern, and his work is focused on race, ethnicity, the economy, inequality, etc. He's done a lot of work for lots of different organizations. He's on the think tank for the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. He's an author. His latest book is this one, America is Not Post-Racial. I think he can probably come back and talk to us about that at a different time. But tonight, I think his focus is going to be on something else. He's been on TV with Taffet Smiley. He's been on PBS, CNN, NPR, et cetera, et cetera. And the last thing I said to him when I was in the DC area is, why didn't you tell us that you wrote an op-ed with Jared Bernstein? And he kind of said, "Oh, that was a long time ago." So Jared Bernstein had been an economic advisor to the current president and had worked with, as you can see, Obama in the Obama White House. So he's pretty modest about this type of stuff. Some of this stuff we find out after the fact, never before during. So, but I'm gonna stop there and turn it over to him. And he's gonna tell us what he's gonna talk about tonight. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. All right, Algie, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you for the embarrassing story and and all this information. I thought you were gonna say, hi, this is my brother. You know, you can take it away, Algie. I did not expect all of that. So let me see. I'm gonna try to share my screen. Let me see if I can figure out now how to do this.
It's the green button at the bottom.
Just
Yeah.
hit screen.
Yeah, no,
There we go.
yeah, that's what I was. Oh, okay, I got it. So you're all seeing the full screen, right?
Yeah, we are. Be good.
Okay, great. Thank you. So as you can see, I'm going to talk about how the United States exports gun violence. I mean, this is an audience of people from Trinidad. I was assuming, I guess incorrectly, that you all would primarily still be in Trinidad, but I see a lot of Canadians and some people from the US. So that actually makes the talk a little bit more relevant, but just giving you all the heads up that I was thinking, oh, I'm talking about people in Trinidad who are concerned about. But I mean, you're still concerned about what happens in Trinidad. So in both senses, it should be useful to you. Okay, so I'm going to start off saying how I became interested in the problem of gun violence. And I'm going to tell you a little story. It's not a funny story, but don't tell my brother Orson, because he'll probably get upset with me once he finds out about it. So a few years ago, I moved to what I now know is the 6th Police District of Washington, D.C. I was looking to pay a little less in rent, save some money. And I moved at that time. Yeah, I didn't know police districts. It was Ward 7 of Washington, D.C. And I knew that the rents were lower there because, yes, there's more poverty and more violence in that community. However, I wasn't totally reckless or, you know, in the United States from the 1990s, there's been a significant decline in, this is the murder rate, significant decline in gun violence and the murder rate. So communities like DC were much safer. Nonetheless, it was a part of DC that had more poverty and violence, etc. And for a number of years, you know, I'm doing my stuff, minding my own business, no problems whatsoever. One day I'm working in my apartment and I hear this very loud bang. And this was very loud. It wasn't one of those sort of firecracker type bangs. It was a really loud bang and not like a normal sound at all. And immediately I thought, I want that sounds like it could be a gun. And part of me really thought, oh, that's a gun. But I didn't want to know. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna go on and pretend I didn't hear that. But of course, I did find out that a couple buildings down from my apartment building, someone was shot and killed. And that was the start. That was the start because it happened so nearby to where I was. And as you all probably know, a lot of people who are killed from gun violence are just innocent bystanders. They have to be in the wrong place. somebody shooting at someone else and they get shot or injured or killed. So since that time, well, let me say, because of that, and also because at that time, not only, it would be a huge problem if I was a victim of gun violence, but also, the woman I am seeing and was seeing then would come visit me at that apartment. And I thought, well, if something happened to her visiting me, that would be even worse than if something happened to me. So I then moved away from that community, but I have been interested in the problem of gun violence from that point on. And since then, I donate to organizations that are dedicated to address gun violence. And you can see this image of me with this T-shirt, "We Can End Gun Violence." That's from the Everytown for Gun Safety organization that I support. And I occasionally go to some of their events, like they had an event that I went to when I took that selfie. So I was able to move away from that community and to a safer community. But of course, most of the people living in that community are not able to move. They don't have the resources. They have various constraints. So the problem persists. And as I mentioned, for several years now, I support organizations trying to reduce gun violence. They're focused on gun safety and gun violence prevention. But it's only in the last 6 months or so I do economic policy research and development. And only in the last 6 months or so, I've decided, look, this is going to be part of my policy work. So I'm going to be more active and more involved on this issue of addressing gun violence. So that's the start and also the current phase that I'm in, which is much more seriously engaged with the issue. And it's it's a good coincidence that we're talking about today, about this issue today, because this is in the United States, the National Gun Violence Survivors Week. And as the slide says, every day more than 110 people in the United States are killed with guns. This week in February marks the approximate time that gun deaths in the United States surpass the number of gun deaths experienced by peer countries in an entire calendar year. So what does that? That means that the amount of people who've died in the US from gun violence in January is about the amount in sort of in Europe that is killed from gun violence in the entire year, in 12 months, to give you a sense of how big a problem it is that we're living with in the US. So, and the quote ends with approximately 200 people survive gunshot wounds every day in the US. So we've gotten a lot better at treating gunshot wounds. So although the death rate isn't a good, even the high death rate isn't a really good indicator of the problem of violence, because doctors are better able to save people who are shot now today than compared in the past. But of course, not everyone, people do die, and lots of kids die. By the time I'm done with this talk, probably a child would have been shot somewhere in the United States, and these are just some of the children who died in the US last year from gun violence. Now, to understand and appreciate gun laws and politics, and to understand how the US exports gun violence, you need to understand gun laws and politics. Now, this image here is of Winsome Sears, and she was just elected Lieutenant Governor of the state of Virginia. Winsome Sears is the first woman to be elected to that position. She's the first person of Jamaican who was born in Jamaica to be elected into that position. And as you can see, she's conservative, and she's her campaign material has her with an assault rifle, an AR-15. And that tells you a lot if you're not aware of this, the position of the Republican Party and the conservative movement with regards to guns. Now, I mentioned that I've only recently started looking at this issue seriously as a researcher. And I'm, even with that caveat, I am a little embarrassed to say that it's only very recently, within that time period, in the last 6 months or so, that I actually read the Second Amendment of the United States. And I was completely shocked when I read it, because it says pretty much the opposite of what I thought it said, and pretty much the opposite of what the conservative movement tells people it says. Because if you look at the Second Amendment, which is here, the first clause is a well-regulated militia. So it says well-regulated. The conservative individual gun rights movement is anti-regulation, right? Their mission is deregulation. And they say that the Second Amendment is a deregulation, basically supports a deregulation position. But when you read it, you see well-regulated is actually in the first clause. So a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. And let me, now a free state, as you all know, the United States is made up of 50, it's the United States of America, so there are 50 states. So being necessary to the security of a free state, meaning one of the 50 states or all of the 50 states. So regulated militia, that's a reference to government regulation. The security of a free state, that's a reference to state government. And then it says the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Now, my understanding, my interpretation, and people disagree with me, particularly conservatives, legal theorists. But anyway, the right of the people, you know, what I've been taught in school is democracy is government by and for the people. So that the people, I understand as the people as represented by as represented by the government, because democracy is by and for the people, shall not be infringed. So the interpretation that I'm arguing for is the interpretation of the Second Amendment that was dominant until, pretty much dominant until the beginning of the 21st century, which is that the Second Amendment is about collective rights. It's about states having the right to a militia or something like a National Guard. And the federal government shall not infringe this right of states to have a militia. And so it was understood as an amendment about collective rights. The conservative pro-gun, pro-deregulation movement has thrown out the first half of the Second Amendment. And for them, the Second Amendment is not about regulation. It's not about state government. It's about the right of the people to keep and bear arms should not be infringed. So they've thrown out half of it. And that is what they use to justify their position for less and less regulations. And there's a case coming up at the Supreme Court where because the Supreme Court is currently has a conservative majority, will again strip away the right of, in this case, New York State to impose, to regulate guns within the state. But as I mentioned, this view that is only a very recent view, recent conservative movement view. Here we can see that the president of the NRA in 1934 stated, "I have never believed in the general practice of carrying weapons. I think it should be sharply restricted and only under license." The NRA was originally a marksmanship organization. So it was just training people to, be better at shooting. It wasn't an organization that was aggressively pushing for more guns in more places anywhere you want it. But unfortunately, that's where it currently is today. And the NRA leads this sort of deregulation of guns, more guns in more places movement. So as you can see here, they're saying our rights are under attack like never before. And they say that all the time under every possible conditions. Now, the United States, in its over 200-year history, at no point has the government tried to, prevent people, have a broad scale, banning of guns. No point in its history. The government, the conservatives in the government have tremendous power, and they would have to approve of the government doing that. So, politically, it's not going to happen. It hasn't happened politically. There's no reason to think it's going to happen, but it does get people agitated, and it does make people give money to the NRA. So it helps the NRA as an organization, even though it's not a realistic assumption. So here we see in the Obama administration, Obama is trying to, stop Obama's gun grabs. With the Biden administration, Joe Biden is coming for your guns. And it works. People like these folks do get agitated and do mobilize to protect their guns. And notice the AR-15 here. I'll talk some more about that. And notice here they're saying stop tyranny, promote freedom. So it's interesting. I don't own a gun. I've never owned a gun. I don't think I've even ever held a gun. So I don't know anything about it really. And I'm trying to understand, but one argument, what I've read from the research is that people say they want guns for self-protection in the United States and for freedom. And of course, we know that there are people who are hunters who have guns. So this freedom idea is interesting. And the freedom is based on an assumption that the only thing that's preventing the government from enslaving us is our guns. Again, that argument doesn't, if you think about it for a while, it there are many problems that you can imagine with it. One being, one of many, that the Second Amendment doesn't exist broadly in the world. I think the US is the only country with anything like it. And by the Second Amendment, I mean the conservative interpretation of the Second Amendment, the current conservative amendment. So, Canada, Germany, Spain, are these countries subject to slavery because they don't have a Second Amendment? Of course not. So it's a really kind of a bizarre argument to me, but I'm not a gun owner. I do think that part of the appeal of guns, and particularly the AR-15, is that people like, playing that they're an action hero, because they're not really very useful weapons as far as guns go. Now, this is someone in Congress, as I mentioned before. The US government, there are so many conservatives in the US government in powerful places, it's not likely that the US government will ever approve, taking a mass gun grab, as the NRA argues. And here's one example of that. This is US Representative, US Congressman Thomas Massey, and this is a photo that he put on Twitter to celebrate Christmas. And here he is with his family and their AR-15s, semi-automatic. I think this is a model of fully automatic weapon, which are illegal. So it must be imitation of a fully automatic. But on the other hand, I wouldn't be surprised if it's an illegal gun that he has that he's advertising. It's totally possible, frankly. But these guns, if you're interested in gun safety, people typically have a handgun, because you can walk around with it, of a handgun. These are not stuff that you will just, go to the mall and walk around day to day. So this is not a gun safety weapon. It's not, again, I don't know that much about guns, but when I looked at okay, what's the best deer hunting rifles? Most of the hunting rifles look like this. And these things, they say, maybe you can use them on the right circumstances, but they're really not suited for hunting. So they're not really for general safety. They're not for hunting. They're the only real use that you have is you go to a gun range and you can shoot, or you want to commit mass murder because they're weapons of, modified weapons of war. So, you're either going to just use them at a gun range or you're going to, use them to hurt lots of people. So mainly, I think for many people who are extremely passionate about them, it's just a toy ultimately, but it's a toy that's shaping their politics and who they vote for and who they elect, which is an unfortunate state of American politics, in my opinion. So now we're going to talk about the problem beyond the US, why US guns are all over Latin America and the Caribbean. And I'm drawing on this book, Blood, Gun, Money, How America Arms Gangs and Cartels by Ion Grillo, who's a Mexican journalist. I'm trying to pronounce his name the way I think he would pronounce it, but I may be wrong. So Ion Grillo. And Mexico is an interesting case because there is only one place in Mexico to legally buy guns, one gun shop in all of Mexico. So it's probably impossible for Mexican criminals to obtain guns from this one gun shop. In spite of that, Mexican criminal gangs are more heavily armed than the local Mexican police. This is an image of some of the guns that the Mexican military have captured. Not only are there a variety of guns, there are grenades, and I think it's a rocket launcher. Some of the more, these guns are worrying enough, but a particularly worrying gun is these 50 caliber sniper rifles. And these rifles are designed to shoot through armor, to penetrate armored vehicles like tanks. They can shoot through concrete. The bullets that they have are about 4 times the size of regular bullets. So they're extremely powerful weapons. And here you see the Washington Post reports gunmen used the 50 caliber in the broad daylight assassination attempt of Mexico's police chief that killed 3 people in June. The Sinaloa cartel used it in battle in the streets of Culiacan, overpowering Mexican troops and forcing them to release arrested leader Ovidio Guzman Lopez. So they have extremely high power weapons. They have a lot of weapons. This image is from NPR, and they said tens of thousands of illegal guns come from the US, but many tens of thousands. The Mexican law enforcement estimates that 2.5 million guns have been smuggled from the United States to Mexico over the past decade. And as you see, as more guns have flowed into Mexico, the percent of homicides committed with firearms have been increasing. Grio reports of the 16,343 firearms that Mexico submitted to the ATF, which is the US Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, to the ATF were tracing in 2018, 70.4% were definitively confirmed to have been made or sold in the United States. And that 74.4% is a low estimate. The ATF, among the bizarre US gun laws, the ATF is prohibited from maintaining a computerized database of guns in the United States because, again, people are afraid that the government is going to come for their guns. So the ATF has to use paper files when they're trying to trace guns. And because of these cumbersome methodology, they likely miss some guns that are from the US. So that 70.4 is assumed to be a low estimate of the actual number. So if you wanted to purchase a gun for a Mexican criminal gang, what do you need to do? You simply need to purchase a gun for a Mexican criminal gang. Because of what's called the gun show loophole, you are not subjected to a background check. You can be a known criminal, have a felony record. You could have a record of domestic violence and threatening to kill your wife. You could be on a terrorist watch list, but you can still buy a military style assault rifle with no paperwork because of the gun show loophole. And the conservatives have argued for the gun show loophole with the rationale that we need this loophole because let's say your neighbor has a gun and your neighbor wants to sell you the gun. It's just too cumbersome to subject, your neighbor to, submit this through the federal bureaucracy to do a background check on you. So let's create this loophole that allows these quote unquote private sellers to sell guns without any background checks.
Actually, can you hold up for a minute? I think a few people have questions for you.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Algie, could you go back to that photo of the congressman and his family?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I personally find this deeply disturbing from a very human level.
Mhm.
Just looking at the smiles on these people's faces, okay? And the fact that all of them, every last one, has a weapon of war, suggests to me that there is something deeply, deeply wrong with this kind of thinking. And when I saw this, I recalled a few years ago, maybe last year or the year before, there was a riot at a Brazilian prison somewhere in the Amazon. Okay, and the prisoners, the gangs took over. And what happened, in fact, was that they beheaded, members of the rival gang. And they were using their heads as footballs. So they were out in the yard kicking around the guy's head, that they just beheaded. And that is the image that keeps coming to me when I see this picture.
Mhm.
You see that there is no humanity really in this. And the question is why? Why have human beings sunk so low? To be all smiles, carrying weapons of war, which they would probably never use.
Mhm.
So-
I'm gonna jump in here, having spent some time in South Carolina, I lived there for 4 years. I had never shot a gun in my life until I lived in South Carolina. And I've shot a gun only one time in my life. And the relationship of folks like you're seeing in this picture to their guns it is something that is very, like, and I'm listening to you, Roger, speak. It is a absolutely foreign concept to most of us on this call. I don't know if everybody on the call is a gun, where they stand on guns. So I can't say everyone. But, Algie said that it's a toy. So let me just give you an example. I was invited to what we would call a party, right? There was food and there was drinks. And they shot 3,000 rounds during that party. It is no toy.
3,000 rounds?
Yes, sir.
And they were drinking.
Yep. Well, the first year they invited me, I said, you guys realize I'm a black guy. We in South Carolina. You're talking about inviting me to a party with drinking, guys getting drunk, and then shooting? And you think I'm gonna come to that? But the next year I went just to get the experience. Everybody brought guns. And the cops never showed up once on private property.
Yeah, well, so where were they shooting? What were they shooting at?
Target. They had a target set up.
They had a target. So what was behind the target? What was blocking
Just dirt, but the guy had acreage.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so let me chime in a little bit here too.
Oh my God.
Most of the homes that I've gone to in Nebraska, where at least 2 people live, have at least 50 guns.
50.
Yes. So yeah, Nebraskans have a little armory in their house because father, son, daughters, they're all hunters. Yes. So they hunt and fish and they have their guns. Now, the kind of guns in the Pisa's photograph are not used for hunting. So that helps you to understand, Roger, why you're feeling that way. Because these are not guns that are used as toys or for sport. These are guns to be used for war. And during the 2020 evaluation of the military here in the United States, there was a headline that says the militia, just the homeowners with guns in the state of Michigan alone, has more firepower than the US military. So imagine that's only Michigan. That's not Nebraska, not Minnesota, not any of these other states, right? So, okay.
I think
Can
Dave
I-
Nanan is itching to say
Yeah,
something.
can I make a
Yeah,
few
yeah.
comments?
Now, there is one person here who knows about guns, so I'll give him a chance to talk.
Mhm.
Okay, so, the whole gun issue is very complex. I look at this picture right? And I know that for some of you, this might be completely out of this world, but this is the norm in Texas. This is the norm in the South. This does not make me uncomfortable, okay? I'm a member of US Law Shield. Number of guns, I wrote down a few comments. Number of guns in America, 400 million guns in America. That is a current estimate, okay? For every 100 individuals in America, there are 124 guns. This is US Law Shield statistics, not NRA, okay? So this issue is very complex. It has to do with culture, history, finance, politics, and even the viewpoints. It's a spectrum. You have conservatives who believe in regulation and want some regulation. For example, I believe in background checks. I believe that assault weapons should be licensed. Sorry, my dog is saying
That's
something.
okay.
Right? And there are conservatives who are on the other end of the spectrum who don't believe in any regulation at all. So what I'd like to see is some sort of medium. And certainly we need to keep the guns out of patients with psychiatric illness, because many gun crimes are committed by individuals who are disturbed. One other comment is, we talk about guns. I'm a gun collector, so a full disclosure, all right? So I'm one of those gun nuts that the liberals refer to, right? Democrats love to talk about people like us. But, you know, I'm also a physician. And I also take the policy of the American College of Surgeons in treating gun crime as an epidemiological issue, okay? I see more gun injuries than all of you all put together. I treat gunshot wounds on a weekly basis in one of the busiest, well-known trauma hospitals in the world, where they train military staff who go to Afghanistan and Iraq. So I've seen what guns can do. But that doesn't stop me from wanting to own a gun. It doesn't make me, you know, disturbed. So when I look at this and you call these people disturbed, this is their culture. This is the South. It's their culture. And this sort of talk of describing people as being disturbed because they, I mean, I could tell you each gun of these individuals, none of these are full automatic, okay? And by the way, owning an automatic weapon is completely legal. I can go to a judge in Fort Bend County and get what's called a stamp and get a suppressor, get an automatic weapon. It's perfectly legal. So it doesn't make them criminals, okay? Assault weapons are produced mostly in the United States for US consumptions. This, you know, 1.2 million guns went to Mexico. I think that's the number you quoted.
2.5, but go ahead.
2.5, okay. 2.5 million guns went to Mexico, by whatever means, from a pool of 400 million guns in the United States. So I just want you to draw a contrast, that's all.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. That's a really important point, because the other thing with that you're touching on, Dave, with the politics of guns in the United States, is that the laws we have do not represent the majority of the American people, even the majority of gun owners. The majority of gun owners favor more regulation than the people in Congress and the NRA. So this is part of the dysfunction with the American government, because, yeah, you know, if people want to hunt, and I don't have a problem with it, but I do have, you know, the gun show loophole where, as I was pointing out, and Grillo, he met people who worked for the Mexican drug cartels. And that's how they got their guns. They went to Texas. They found a quote unquote private seller who's selling AR-15s or sniper rifles or whatever. And that's where they get their guns. Now, if there was a background check it would be more difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it would be more difficult for them to get that. And I think most gun owners support that, but the people in Congress aren't listening to most gun owners. So anyway, there's some other hands up.
Algie, there are two more hands here. Roger and Peter, you're going.
I was just going to comment that I think one of the premise, and you mentioned this, Algie, that people say that they need guns is for their protection, right? Just my observations anecdotally is that, with all these mass shooting events in the States, right? How many times do we see potential victims or the people who are subject to this mass shooting event pulling out a gun to defend themselves? It seems like maybe I've heard of it once or twice in the last few years, where anybody with a gun for their personal protection was trying to defend themselves. Instead, it's lambs to the slaughter here, especially against the AR, the automatic weapons. So, that premise. I mean, how many times does it have to be disproved that people are not really carrying around these weapons for their own protection?
Yeah, and to that point, more importantly, is that it's not easy to do. There are people cite an example of the police in New York having a shootout with this guy. I think it was in Times Square, and of course, it's hard to do. They miss a lot and put a lot of people's lives in danger. It's not. People see movies, and in movies, the good guy can do all these amazing things, but under the pressure of somebody shooting at you and somebody moving and they're a distance away, it is not easy to do. Even trained New York police officers are, in those situations, miss more times than they hit. Anyway, go ahead.
Statistically, ordinary police, not SWAT, are the worst shots. Okay, they honestly, they've done studies to show this.
Yeah, no, but the thing
The
is
guy who's having
the thing is in Texas, when you make it, basically any random person can have a gun supposedly for their own self-protection. Are they going to be better than the average police officer or worse?
No.
We have
And
two
there is a
Canadians who
deterrent
want
factor
to
of guns.
ask questions. Peter and Richard.
Maybe I'll let Richard go first because yeah, go ahead, Richard.
I want to comment or add to that picture of the family with those guns and to comment on Dave and on Dr. Dave's comment that it's part of the culture, right? My sort of issue is that just because it's part of the culture doesn't make it right. Number one. Number two, slavery was part of American culture, right? And we found out hundreds of years later, right, that there was something fundamentally wrong with that quote unquote culture. The issue is it's about innocent people are being killed, right? And and social media is being used to further the goals and agendas of people who are not are disturbing, right? If you're a gun collector, fine, great, that's for you, but not everybody, or for the most part, are as rational thinking as we would like them to be. And I'll just leave it at that.
Ken.
You know, I don't know. I'm gonna go off a little bit because, to be honest, I find aspects of talks like these frustrating. It's. I wonder if Dr. Nanan finds his position contradictory, and I'm curious to know what his fascination with guns are. Secondly, I mean, you guys have heard me over and over again talk about the European propensity for war and the fact that they have developed a warlike structure in every aspect of society we live in. America spends more on military than the next 23 countries combined. So what do you expect the population to do? This is what they do. They develop weapons of war. So it's a part of it, and we always seem to be focused on the characteristics rather than the actual problem. It's like you have the flu, but the focus is on the fact that your nose running. So we're gonna devote our attention to the fact that your nose running and ignore the underlying major cause. So I don't know if I expressed that properly, but that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, so Caesar and Can, you could put your hands down now.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and so I want to address one big issue, and that is everybody on the call is entitled to their own opinion. So if Dave Nanan shares an opinion, we can ask him why. If you want to call him after and have a one-on-one, you could do that, but he's entitled to present his point of view, just like each of the other people on the call is. And if we feel uncomfortable by looking at a photograph, we can say so. If he feels that he's not uncomfortable and could relate to that because of his value systems or mindset, that is his business. He, as a member of this class, has earned the right and the privilege to share his point of view. Okay, so I want to get back to Algie's talk though. So I'm going to hand the microphone to Richard Poon King. And Richard, when you're done, please pass the microphone back to Algie.
I don't believe in guns, but I support Dave and Denison in the sense that looking at that picture, one has to understand where these people are coming from. The dad and the mom, they probably grew up in households where that sentiment might have existed. Subconsciously, through social osmosis, they are who they are today. The people who they grew up around probably think likewise, and it becomes the norm. So their norm may be different to our norm, to your norm, but the point is they see it from their point of view. And as Denison said, Dave's entitled to his opinion, but Dave's opinion is reflective of what happens in that part of America. Peter Hall alluded to it as well when he went to that shooting party in South Carolina. This is nothing out of the ordinary to these people. The issue is when you take this sort of culture out of that environment, you move it into inner city or vice versa, that's when things start to happen, when people start to exploit that sort of culture for nefarious ends. Or if people take laws, your right to bear arms, to the extreme where you want to walk around with a bazooka. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's insightful. But the issue, and this is something that Dave brought up, and I mentioned before, there are ways, and many countries do this, even where people are able to have guns, and they make it more difficult for criminals to get guns. In the US, we are constantly making it easier for criminals to get guns. And that's that's one of the issues. So I was talking about the gun show loophole, which, as I mentioned, Grio found people who worked for Mexican drug gangs, and this is what they were exploiting to get their guns. You know, so he mentioned, although these, as I mentioned before, the justification for this loophole was that, oh, your neighbor has one gun and he wants to sell you. But what people are doing is that you have people who are essentially gun dealers. They have many guns and they're selling them without doing any background checks because the law allows them to. So that's one problem that we have. And as Dave mentioned, many gun owners disagree with this law, but you know, the people in Congress, you know, are doing what they're doing. The other you know, surprising and disturbing thing is that, as the last quote suggests, there's no federal statute specifically prohibiting firearms trafficking in the US. So, you know, you could go to a federal prosecutor and have a sworn statement, I traffic firearms, and they can't prosecute you for that. They have to look for other technicalities to address firearm trafficking. There is no specific statute against that. Again, very weak laws in terms of gun safety for the country, but also for Mexico. So when I think of all this and its impact on Mexico, again, lots of guns that you know, a minimum of 70% of the guns that Mexican criminals are using are coming from the United States. And there's this old quote from Porfirio Diaz who said, "Poor Mexico, so far from God and so close to the United States." So when I think of this situation, I always think of this quote because Mexico is suffering from these very loose gun laws or a lack of laws in the United States. And now let me switch things up a bit and talk about, well, what are some of the drivers of gun violence in the United States? And this is the area of research and investigation that I'm looking at. So we see that in areas with more poverty in particular, we find more gun violence in communities where there's more social capital or civic engagement, where there are stronger community ties and community supports. There's less gun violence. Communities with more economic opportunity, we find less gun violence. Communities with public welfare spending, and public welfare spending really impacts all the prior three. It would help reduce poverty, help increase civic engagement, help increase economic opportunity. Those things all, public welfare spending is associated with lower gun violence, and access to illegal guns is associated with higher levels of gun violence. Okay, and this is just some of the correlations that people have found. You know, these letters, we represent the states, different states in the United States. You see, as the poverty rate increase, we see higher rates of gun deaths per 100,000, similarly hospitalizations. This is an analysis that I did looking just at African Americans by state, and we see that as economic hardship, household income hardship increases, where we see an increase in gun homicide for the Black gun homicide rate for those states. This gets at the civic engagement and social capital. This is an analysis, and we can focus on this column here with the murder rate. And it's a statistical analysis, just giving you the effect for every 100,000. So you can imagine if you have a community of 100,000 and you add one nonprofit, one organization that has a substance abuse program, that statistically you see a 22.6 or about a 23% reduction in the murder rate in that community. A workforce development program, you see about a 21% reduction in the murder rate. Crime prevention, surprisingly, isn't as powerful as these two, only around a 7% reduction. Youth organizations, around a 4%, neighborhood development, around a 2% reduction in the murder rate.
Algie,
Yes.
can you tell us, so what percentage of gun deaths are attributable to people who are trying to protect themselves, or however you would define that?
Trying to protect themselves?
Well, yeah,
like
somebody who says,
self-defense
hey, I have a
situation?
gun. I have a gun because I don't want anybody to break into my house. So, that type of thing. Is there some?
And then what? They shoot someone breaking into their house?
Right.
I don't know. I haven't seen, I don't know. I recall reading something about that in Griot's book, but I don't remember specifically. I think the sort of individual gun rights folks say that it's much more, it happens all the time, but we don't have any good stats on that. We do know that there are people who have guns for self-protection, and then unfortunately, some child picks up the gun and kills him or herself or someone else. That we know that happens. Again, it can be used in domestic violence situations. So there is research. I'm pretty sure I've seen research that a gun in your home kind of increases the likelihood that you're going to be shot. So there's some hands up. And Roger?
Yeah, unmute, Roger.
Sorry about that. Yeah. The previous slide, Algie. Just want to have a look back at that one, if you don't mind. So when I look at that, I mean, what you're saying there is, listen, the biggest bang for your buck in reducing, I guess, murders, period. I don't know if it's gun murders, but murders, period, is for communities to develop substance abuse and help their citizens get work, right? I mean, that fact, that's overwhelming in there. And I'm just curious how many communities, how many cities, how many states or whatever even pay attention to this,
Yeah, not much. And yes, I'm glad you highlighted that, because the guns and drugs are pretty closely intertwined, right? Both the people trafficking in drugs need the guns to protect their drugs, protect their money, protect their turf. So they are very interested in having lots of guns because, they can't turn to the police to protect their stuff if they're doing illegal drugs. People who are drug addicts often commit crime to get money to get drugs. And because they know that dealers want drugs, they can trade guns for drugs. So that happens too. So yeah, there's a close relationship in multiple ways with guns and drugs. They go together. Yeah.
And I would say, just one more comment. I would say that this suggests that there is an overlapping of it's not necessarily defund the police, but redirect some funds towards workforce development and substance abuse, because just crime prevention is not giving you the big gains that you expect, right? So that kind of overlaps into that whole discussion. and it shouldn't be lumped as defund the police. It should be just reallocating some funds, right?
Right, yeah. And
Yeah.
as someone was saying, you want to get more at the root causes. Police tend to be dealing with some of the end causes. These get at some of the root causes. And in this analysis, the guy who did this, Sharkey, said in his analysis, most of the organizations were these other three, right? It wasn't substance abuse and workforce development. So you're right. We need to pay more attention to that part of the story.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
Yeah.
So Roger stole my question. Okay, because I was going to ask that.
Okay, well
on the-
then don't ask another
No,
one.
on the previous slide, let's just ignore Dennis for a sec. On the previous slide.
On this one?
Yeah, on this one. Why is MD the outlier here? And I'll shut up now.
MD, Maryland, and I think this is Missouri. That I wish I knew.
Okay.
I need to do some research because guess where I live? I live in MD. I need to figure that out. And at some point I will, or at least I will try. But yeah, there are some outliers. I don't know why, because these are complicated relationships. It's not one thing. There are multiple things going on that affect this. It's
And
not-
so, Algie, a simple explanation for why it's possibly an outlier is that something weird happened in that year or in that time frame that data was collected. Some big murder event in, let's say, in a high income area in Maryland, for example.
Yeah. That's a possibility too.
I mean, the reality is, like the MD stat is probably coming out of Baltimore, and the Missouri stats coming out of St. Louis. St. Louis is still leading the country in terms of murder, and it is because it's an urban city with high unemployment, low education, all the socioeconomic factors come right in, so it's heavily crimed. So
Yeah.
Well, before we close off tonight, I wanted to talk a little bit about the gun thing in Trinidad as well. If you guys
I was gonna say, Algie, we don't want to know about the Caribbean.
Can I let me just go quickly. I think I can. I think I'm close to finishing up. Let me just go quickly because I'm getting there. That's where I'm getting. Well, I'm not getting there, but I'm getting to that picture. I want to get to that picture. This is just showing that, states with stronger gun laws or states with weaker gun laws, you find more gun deaths. Okay, so this is where I wanted to get. And this is just showing, as I was saying before, so the orange is a firearm death rate of over 4 to 5 per 100,000. The red is over 10 per 100,000. Notice that, the yellow is less than 1 per 100,000, right? Notice that Canada is yellow, Europe is yellow, most of Asia and Australia and New Zealand is yellow. A good chunk of Africa is yellow, and the places in Africa that are not yellow are still, most of them have less gun violence than the United States. So generally, Africa too has less gun violence. Unfortunately, in the Americas, we live in a bad neighborhood in general. This is the homicide zone on the planet. Is over here. So Mexico, Central America, we know their guns are coming from the US. Rio mentioned Jamaica, that guns coming out of Florida ending up in Jamaica. I don't know the situation for Trinidad. And I'll stop there and let you guys take it from there.
Might I ask, what's the situation with Japan?
Oh, Japan is very, very low. So where's Japan? These are the Japanese. Japan has one of the lowest. I think it's Singapore is the lowest, And
Okay.
Japan is the second lowest in terms of
Okay, so
gun.
below
gun
below
homicide.
Japan, we're talking about Fiji, those islands there?
Oh, this is the Philippines. The Philippines are pretty
Oh,
high.
the Philippines. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
the Philippines are pretty high.
Okay. Okay.
Where are the guns coming from in the Philippines?
I don't know. Someone told me that they make some of their own also, that they like make, like just put together what they can to make the gun. So some of it is not even formally manufactured guns, but I don't know where it's coming from. That's a good question.
Yeah, but if we fold the map, the Philippines getting their guns from California.
Probably, you're right.
Okay.
Yeah, and so what I want for us to think about, right, is if some of this is related to the violent way that slaves were treated when they were brought to this dark red area.
I'm not too sure I'm getting where you're going with this question.
Okay.
Actually.
I am saying that the colonial masters poisoned the DNA of these slaves to the point where it was acceptable for a certain kind of punishment to the lethal. And it has continued over the period of time where the people who live in Brazil and Venezuela's and the Caribbean and even parts of Central America, they have access to these weapons that are clearly coming from the United States and are willing to accept killing each other. That's what I'm asking for us to talk about.
Let me try to counter that argument, if I may. When we were growing up, was Trinidad as violent as it is now? We're talking the historical slave experience, okay? So could we make that argument then?
Okay.
I would say
versus now?
yes. I would say yes. Trinidad has always had a high murder rate.
Yeah, and I would say Trinidad and other Caribbean islands have high murder rates, whether it is with cutlass or with guns. It's just that now with guns, it's easier for you to kill more faster.
Yeah, I don't think that is necessarily true. I mean, back in the day, in the 60s and 70s and so on.
DP, you ask a question, you get an answer. Let PK talk now. Louis, keep going.
Okay.
If you look at the relationship with slavery, whatever it is, then you can't explain Mexico. All right. Mexico didn't have as much slavery from Africa as the Caribbean had. All right. And coming back historically, the death rates that we see now from gun violence in Trinidad and murder, I think is more correlated with the drug trade.
Okay.
All right. So it's maybe more socioeconomic than anything else.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Dave.
Yeah, just one comment on where guns are produced. We know what the situation is in the United States, but the US is not the only major producer of guns. China, Russia, right, South Africa, and several other countries produce a very large number of weapons, including weapons that actually assault. Most of my weapons are German weapons. Apart from a Kalashnikov AK, which is Russian made and Bulgarian made, most of my guns are German guns.
Yeah.
So it's
So
not just over.
sorry, I brought up a question earlier. And specifically today, because I was wondering about I don't know if Dennis, if this is something I should say, I should do it individually, but I was wondering about, because we talk about guns and culture, and I was wondering, especially Dave, who is in the medical field, who is devoted to saving lives, I wanted an answer on why the fascination with guns.
And so
I would like to answer that as best as I can, because
and
I'm no different from the rest of society. It's a complex issue.
Yeah.
I grew up with guns. I went hunting with my father when I was 5 years old. Okay, so it is part of my culture. I knew how to shoot a gun when I was 10 years old. I came to America and I live in a state where we hunt and shoot. And I like shooting targets. I like shooting shotguns. I don't hunt as much as I used to, but I still do. And so that is part of my culture. And it is very much a part of the culture in the South. When you look at my friends, black and white, the prevalence of guns and gun ownership, it's not really a race thing. It's part of what makes America what America is.
Wow.
Yeah, and so Peter, let me chime in. And Dave, first of all, thank you for sharing your point of view, because I think the only way that we learn from each other is from sharing with each other our different perspectives so we could see more of the whole. So I am here in Nebraska. I have had opportunities to shoot guns. I have not taken the opportunity. My son-in-law has a machine shop where he manufactures guns. He has a shooting range. He's invited me to come and just learn how to use a handgun to shoot. His favorite saying is, the only counter for a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun who knows how to use it. You know what he asked me that made me know where I was? He said, if you get a gun, will you use it? And because I will not use the gun to shoot someone else, I have taken my stance that I do not want to be somebody who has guns or uses guns. So Dave and I grew up in the same kind of part of Trinidad. My parents had guns that they would use because if you had land, you had guns as a landowner down in Trinidad. Okay. You as an individual, Peter, have to make your choice about whether you like a certain sport or you don't. Dave Grahu like cricket, right? Panto like cricket. Some of us like football. Some of us like both, right? Dave has his sport. I could accept that that is his sport, but it's not my sport. So that's where I would leave.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not putting Dave down. All I'm trying to do is understand, right? Because I hear this argument a lot about guns are part of American culture. I mean, I grew up with guns too. I grew up in Tobago with my father going to hunt. I used to shoot a 16 gauge shotgun when I was 10, 11 too. Unlike Dave, I didn't go into a situation where guns were commonplace. So I didn't have that experience of everybody around me having guns and that kind of stuff. So maybe that's where the fascination comes from. But my point is that if you have a situation where the ease with which people have guns or could get guns is leading to so much violence and so much murder, it seems to me to be a cop-out to just say, well, you know, we can't do anything about it because it's part of the culture. It doesn't seem to me to be the humane approach. And I think that's what bothers me.
If I might interject as well, I had my hand up for a bit. The only time I ever touched a gun, really, was in cadets when we were in Form 1 or Form 2, right? Since that time, I have never been around a gun. I've never touched a gun. So clearly my experience is very different from Dave and other people who are very familiar with guns. Okay, but I want us to go back to that time because, you know, I was saying that the murder rate in Trinidad, totally different from when we were growing up as children. And the reason for that is that in the 70s, after the Rasta people came, you know, came out and there was a lot of repression, when you really think about it, of Rastafari, and then following up on that very quickly was the importation of drugs into Trinidad by people like by people like Dolce D and Naim Naya and all these fellas who brought in not the marijuana that the Rastas were using, but a whole heap of different things, cocaine and other things. And with that came the gangs. Okay, right? And that has just escalated from that time to this time, where you have people in Lower Nelson Street cannot go in Upper Nelson Street in Port of Spain because they're gonna get shot in the same street. Because you have the Rasta gang on one side, and you have the the something ISIS on the other side.
Muslimin.
You know, and that is the situation, because all of these fellas have guns, which, by the way, Trinidad does make. Okay, you will recall that in 1990, where did Abu get his guns from? They were imported from the US.
From the United States.
Right? You know, so, you know, and of course, Trinidad has very porous borders. So now we have a lot of guns flowing from Venezuela, as you can see from this map in front of us, right? So I was listening to a guy the other day, and he was saying that, okay, so you are afraid and you want a gun, right? You want to do it legally, and you go to the police and you apply for a weapon, okay, and they give you a 6-shooter. What exactly is that going to do for you if you are faced with an AK-47, which is what these bandits have? Right? And that is the dilemma that is facing a lot of people in Trinidad. Okay, I'll shut up now so that someone else could.
I think, let me just say
Good
this
talk.
last thing. I think the issue with guns in Trinidad is more of an economic thing. It's about drugs, it's about money. It's different from in the States. It's a cultural thing, where people have guns and they bring out guns at parties. You don't find that in Trinidad, where people, like Dave said, would invite you to a party and bring out guns and start shooting. So it's a different thing. I mean, I went to Inter, I taught at Inter, and I had well, not Faizabad Anglican Secondary. And I had a kid come in my Form 4 class with one of them long elongated bags where he apparently kept his books, and he, after school one day, he pulled out a 9mm. And he was proud of having it because he was selling weed. He used to go to Laramie and get a weed, and he had to walk with his gun because he didn't want people to steal it from him. And he used to walk around with that gun all the time, and it was directly tied to him selling weed and making money. You know? So I think the situation in Trinidad, the situation in America is a little different. But, you know, that's only my impression, my 2 cents.
Algie, do you have any closing thoughts?
Awesome. There are 2 hands up still.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Wayne and Peter. Sorry, my bad.
Yeah, and then we'll hand over to you to wrap up with Algie.
I'll let Wayne go first because he hasn't spoken all night.
Yeah, guys, having lived in Arkansas a few years, deep south, I mixed with some guys down there who believe that America needs to have a militia at all times to keep the federal government in check. In fact, they said it is written in the Constitution that we need to have a militia. So those are some of the reasons why we have a drive for guns. And as we saw under Donald Trump's administration, quite a lot of them came out. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
You know, all my life, you know, my politics leans to the left, but on this one issue, I lean to the right. So I'm going to be very open, because there is the human culpability and the intent to commit any type of act of violence is where it begins. The gun is just a tool to execute that type of violence. So I think we have to put some emphasis on the fact that, you know, crime is high in some areas and there's a lot of killing because of guns. the intent to commit the murder was there all along. It's just at some point they got the gun to be able to do that. And yes, it comes from America because we make them here, you know. But to say that the gun is causing the problem, I always struggle with that because in the communities, like, you know, like in that photo, in the rural areas in America, folks are not killing each other with those guns. They own them, they use them, but they're not committing crimes with them. So
I don't agree. I don't know. You have a road rage incident, Peter, right? And one of the people have guns and they get so angry, they pull out the gun and they shoot the other person.
So let me stop you right there. So I'm gonna use myself as an example. If I get into a confrontation with you and I'm not armed with a gun, I'm gonna try to de-escalate the situation. Okay? If I have a gun, I'm not doing that.
Yeah,
And that is me personally.
Exactly. That's my point.
No, I'm not saying everybody's like me. I'm just using me.
Yeah, but if you have access to a gun, when you get angry, you have that gun, you're going to pull it out and use it if you get angry enough. If you didn't have access to the gun, maybe you would fight, but both people would walk away. So this is the problem I have with people saying guns are not the issue.
Dave wanted to make a contribution.
Yeah.
Well,
Dave?
two comments. First one is one of the first values in gun training is that you should do everything possible not to have to use your gun. So if you're faced with a situation that you can de-escalate and back off, do it. If the guy cuts in front of you and pulls a gun, then back off, all right? Very simple. But I just want to share with you one story very quickly. This is the only time I drew my gun and I was prepared to shoot someone, okay? I was at a traffic light and it was late in the evening. And it was a traffic light where in the city where people come up to you and beg for money, right? And I was driving brand new sports Mercedes, okay? You know, Dr. car in Houston. Long story short, this guy came up to me, asked for money, and I just waved him off. And he went back and he picked up like a 2x4 and came to attack me in the car. Now, Dennis was always after me about this, but I'm always armed, okay? I carry, and in my car, I have another weapon in my car. So this is where I think guns are important, because a gun can be a deterrent. This guy was within the critical zone, which is 6 yards of my car. I drew one of my weapons, which has a laser on it, and I pointed it straight in the middle of his chest, and he could see it. You know what that guy did? Turned around and walked away. You know what I would have done if he started to attack me in the car? I would have shot him in the middle of the chest.
Exactly.
Okay. This is a very interesting story, Dave. I know time. Just quickly. I was listening to Tony Fraser about many years ago, maybe in the 80s, and he was talking to some guys on the street who were bandits, and he asked them, "What is the law about having a gun?" And he told them, "Boss, when I have a gun," and these are young fellas, eh? He said, like, grown men is humble before me, you know what I'm saying? Right? Because imagine men old like your father and your grandfather, right? Humbling before you. And this is what that instrument does for a lot of people. Now, it so happened Dave is trained, but a lot of people are not. So I'll stop there now. I want to hear from Dr. Gura, who, sometimes during the night, I don't think he made a contribution.
All right. Since we closed enough and you give me the opportunity, just to prove that I could still talk while I went to the dentist. But seriously, first of all, thank you very much, Algie. What I admired is what you presented here, and is the situation with the gun distribution. I think a lot of the discussion that went on beyond that is a lot of speculation, because we have not had that data yet to go. I think you have to come back now at some other point and start to look at some of the other factors, right? But I really appreciate this amount, because I did not know that this was how widespread the distribution and the gun is. And in one of the slides that I would like to go back to at some time is where you actually look at some of the factors that influence how the correlations between gun and I think Roger Ahmed actually kind of went to that graph, which is very important. But just to talk a little bit on the culture thing, Dave, I remember growing up in the village, and cricket was not my only hobby, but actually the thrill of having a pellet gun. I'm talking about way back, and hunting birds and things, to the effect that I now remember anytime I would go to a bazaar or some event where they had like shooting balloons or whatever, even if you go Coney Island or whatever, that was still the biggest thrill for me. But if you put me in the situation like Peter Hola Point, I don't think I had the guts or the courage to pull a gun and shoot somebody, unless maybe I'm really angered by something like Hokan say, and I don't know how I go react then. But I might still believe in drop and run and live another day, but I don't know. But it's good. I think a lot of other factors have to be taken into consideration to go down the road that we are talking about. But I think there are some valid points, and I like what I heard so far. So thanks for the opportunity. Thanks again, Algie. I think you need to come back at some other point in time and maybe hear a little more about your expertise there. And thanks for the opinions that were shared by everybody. Okay.
Yeah.
PK,
We haven't heard from
shaking his
Sophie
head
either.
just now.
Sorry?
PK was shaking his head just now. I think he has something to say.
Go ahead, PK.
So that point passed. I can't remember what it was. I mean, I didn't agree with what you said. I can't remember what it was.
With economy.
No, I think it was something that Peter kind of said.
You don't agree with, but you don't remember?
No, and then Dave came in and Dave was talking. Oh, yeah, I don't remember. All right. It all has to do. All right. Look at marijuana. People growing up smoking marijuana all the time in the country. You never hear people going berserk and chopping up people and violence, whatever it is. But go in an inner city, and then you have people using marijuana every day and from morning to night, and you have a problem. So likewise with guns, in a culture where guns are used for hunting and recreation, that sort of thing, you don't really have an issue. And most of those people, they're not going to have AR-15s. They're going to have sporting shotguns, whatever it is. But then when you move that into an inner city where there's no hunting in a concrete jungle, except to shoot at people. So therein lies the issue. It all has to do with context. It all has to do with context. That was my 2 cents.
All right. Thank you, Algie.
I just put my hand up here for one last thing. I know I want to, as DP, you bring back the good old days. You remember what was the best toy you used to get when you was really small?
Me, I know what my best toy. It was a truck that used to pick up grass. I know you're trying to get me to say a caps gun, but
no, well,
that is what it was.
I specifically remember in the village growing up again, if you didn't get a gun and sack, it was considered to be RCC. You know, if you didn't get a gun and anybody got an aeroplane or a ball or something, you know.
Or a truck.
That's for another day too, you know.
I just have one other comment. The one time I shot one gun, it was that AR-15, and I have to tell you, it's very hard to miss the target with that gun. And that's my only comment.
Algie, do you have any closing comments?
You're on mute, apparently. We can't hear you.
Let me just give you all a little bit. If you want to email me, if you want some information to follow up, just send me an email at algernon.austin@outlook.com. This has been a great discussion. I really appreciate all the perspectives and all the ideas shared. I think it was very enriching. Yeah, and it's been fun. It's been fun hanging out with you all and talking. So Nothing more than that. Nothing more than that. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Thank you,
Thank
Archie.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you
Thank
for
you,
presenting
Sophie, for
that.
showing up.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
And so, Orson, thank you for inviting your brother. And so, on behalf of the boys, Algie, know that we do appreciate it, and maybe we will appreciate Orson a little bit more now.
Yeah, well,
All
you need for
right.
Peter to bring his brother now, and you will be happy. You know?
Which Peter is that?
Now then,
Either one, you know what I'm saying?
But,
One-
yeah, I just want to say, add to Dennis and say thank you for
Thank you very much.
sharing with us because of your vast experience as a director and a learned man in this field. It's really an honor for us to be a part of this presentation, to have you share stuff with us. And so I think you must really love your brother to spend time sharing with us.
Bradford, I ain't hear you say nothing for a while, boy.
Hey, that's true.
Actually, I haven't said anything throughout the talk.
Okay.
Just been absorbing everything. But if the thought that keeps going through my mind, we talk about culture, culture, culture. My question is taking it way back to the United States, early history. What was it that generated this particular culture? You know, it is not just the Second Amendment. It must have been other things involved to develop this particular culture in the United States.
We will have to let Peter Khan answer your question on another day.
Yeah. And the other thing too, my father at one stage was a policeman. Okay. And he was responsible for guns occasionally. I remember one morning my mother said to me, you know, your father brought some guns home last night, you know, because they were in transit and he was responsible for these 4 guns. I never saw a gun in my life. I've never seen a gun in my life. But he had already taken them back to work. Okay, that's my only experience with guns. Only experience. Except, of course, in our day, we had Boise Singh. Remember Boise Singh?
Yeah.
You ever heard about Boise Singh?
Yeah.
And the green face man and gold teeth and all those guys. You know, we had our gangs, the Samon gang and this gang, etc. But it wasn't to the extent at which you have it today. And as Roger said earlier on, the introduction of drugs and cocaine and all that, you know, it's an economic problem in Trinidad, a social problem, you know, and that's, I don't know if it's gonna get better. We have the same situation happening in Canada now. Yesterday, a 14-year-old girl got murdered. Oh, sorry, they haven't decided whether it's murder or not. But she got shot in a hallway. Good student, grade 9 student, great student, or you hearing good things about her? But somehow she got shot in a stairwell, right? Where are the guns coming from? Canada has no gun producer. Guns are coming from the States. You know? That's my 2 cents worth.
Freaking America, eh?
Spoken like a true Canadian.
You only get supply when there's demand.
Oh boy, touche.
Or the other way, you supply when there is a demand.
Or you create the demand and then you supply.
All right.
Another point.
Hey, what's up for next week?
Yeah, one other point. Japan Japan had its first murder for I think over a year by a gun. One. Think about it.
When was this?
A few weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago. Somebody killed somebody with a gun, which was unusual for Japan. Okay.
Awesome, thanks for asking the question. Roger, Ahmad, you want to give a 1-minute thumbnail for next week?
Sure. Next week we're doing film review again. And as you guys would have seen on by email, etc., we're looking at a documentary by David Attenborough and another gentleman. I forget who the other guy is, but it's called Breaking Boundaries. It's 75 minutes long. It's a full-length feature. So obviously we're not going to be able to show it during the Zoom call, but we're looking for folks to view it beforehand at your own leisure. It's available on Netflix. So have a look at it. I know Michael Reddit has looked at it and he's raising some alarms. He's going, things might be too late, but interesting to view. So have a look at that. Also, we could join that with some sort of short film, anything that's of interest. It doesn't have to be the same topic, but if you guys have some short films or something that you would recommend, please forward them to me and we'll show a short one on the Zoom call itself before the feature talking about the Breaking Boundaries. So
Yes,
so that's
and the Breaking Boundaries is on Netflix. Yes.
That's right. Yes. And and then for you guys, a month from next week, we'll be doing the book review. And I'm reporting that I got my copy of Chooses with Maury. I got it delivered today. And to my surprise, it's only 200 pages long. Right, Dennis? 200 pages long and an easy read, it looks like. So still time to read it if you get a chance. I will be starting that shortly. And that's for March, right?
Yeah, and guys, I bought one this week as well. It was for $7, right? So it's not an expensive book.
Boy, the ass, no wonder I paid $21 for mine, Canadian.
Boy, blame the US again, man.
It's the whole gun thing.
Mine came in yesterday, but I was surprised that this particular book, the Kindle version, was more expensive than the hard copy, than the soft copy.
Yeah.
So, paperback. Yeah.
Like I said, I was pleasant.
The reason why you get a difference in price when you go there, look for the ones that they have a series of this, because one place had it for 21 and I got it for 7 something, as I say.
Yeah, it's Canada, boy. You know what I mean?
Oh,
and then I had to pay tax on top of that.
Thanks to America.
Yeah. Anyways, that's it for next week and a month from next week.
All right. Okay, guys.
All right.
Well,
Next week. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it.
Nice seeing you again, Dave.
Yeah.
Nanan.
Yeah.
You
I see you,
always,
Nanan. Take care.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All
take
right,
care,
thanks,
Dave.
Austin.
Okay.
All right,
Being
anytime.
as well,
Take care.
you take care, man. Nice seeing you.
Yeah.
Later.
Take care, folks.
Okay. Take care.
All right. See you guys.
All right.